A Double Impulse by James D. and Jean Wakatsuki Houston. This is an excerpt from the acclaimed memoir Farewell to Manzanar, published in 1973. One of its authors, Jean Wakatsuki, and I'm saying her name wrong, forgive me, Houston, was held along with thousands of other Japanese Americans in concentration camps on the west coast of the United States during World War II. After the 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor, their loyalty to the United States was questioned, and so they were denied their civil liberties and kept in prison for the duration of the war. The camp Houston was interred at was called Manzanar, Spanish for apple orchard. So as you read this memoir, look for this idea of the double impulse that's mentioned in the title. There's always some sort of hint that comes from the title. So we want to know what that is. So a double impulse could be two impulses or impulses that contradict each other. So you want one thing, but you don't want that thing as well. Or you want one thing and another thing that cancels it out. We're looking for that as we read along. When the sixth grade teacher ushered me in, the other kids inspected me, but not unlike I myself would study a new arrival. She was a warm, benevolent woman who tried to make this first day as easy as possible. She gave me the morning to get the feel of the room. That afternoon, during a reading lesson, she asked me if I'd care to try a page out loud. I had not yet opened my mouth except to smile. When I stood up, everyone turned to watch. Any kid entering a new class wants, first of all, to be liked. This was uppermost in my mind. I smiled wider and then began to read. I made no mistakes. When I finished, a pretty blonde girl in the front of me said quite innocently, "Gee, I didn't know you could speak English." She was genuinely amazed. I was stunned. How could this have been even in doubt? It isn't difficult now to explain a reaction, but at age 11, I couldn't believe anyone could think such a thing, say such a thing about me, or regard me in that way. I smiled and sat down, suddenly aware of what being of Japanese ancestry was going to be like. I wouldn't be faced with physical attack or with overt shows of hatred. Rather, I would be seen as someone foreign or as someone other than American, or perhaps not seen at all. During the years in the camp, I had never really understood why we were there, nor had I questioned it much. I knew no one in my family had committed a crime. If I needed explanations at all, I conjured up vague notions about a war between America and Japan. But now I'd reached an age where certain girlhood mysteries began to make sense. And I should say certain childhood mysteries. I read that wrong. This girl's guileless remark came as an illumination, an instant knowledge that brought with it the first buds of true shame. From that day on, part of me yearned to be invisible. In a way, nothing could have been nicer than for no one to see me. Although I couldn't have defined it at the time, I felt that if attention were drawn to me, people would see that what this girl had first responded to. They wouldn't see me, they would see the slant-eyed face, the Oriental. This is what accounts in part for the entire evacuation. You cannot deport 110,000 people unless you've stopped seeing individuals. Of course, for such a thing to happen, there has to be a kind of acquiescence on the part of the victims, some submerged belief that this treatment is deserved or at least allowable. It's an attitude easy for non-whites to acquire in America. I had inherited it. Manzanar had confirmed it, and my feeling at 11 went something like this. You're going to be invisible anyway, so why not completely disappear? So did you notice that she has this impulse to be invisible and then also to completely disappear, but also she wanted to be noticed. She had the desire to be noticed and to be treated like an American, and yet people didn't treat her like she was an American. I'm just observing this. So, of course, this is about Jean. It is based on a true story because it's a nonfiction memoir. If we were answering those questions, who is this about and what do they want? And what do they do because of what they want? And what happens next and how does it end and what do we learn? Well, in this case, we've learned that this is about a young girl who, at about age 11, stands up in front of the classroom, wants to be noticed, wants to be liked, discovers that this is going to be a complicated experience. She's going to be judged as not being as literate or as smart as other people, and so maybe she wants to disappear. She's not quite sure what she wants. That is the double impulse. Lots of us have multiple emotions at the same time, so this makes perfect sense to me. Does it to you, though? I'm kind of curious. Okay, another part of me did not want to disappear. With the same sort of reaction that sent Woody into the army, I instinctively decided I would have to prove that I wasn't different, that it should not be odd to hear me speaking English. From that day forward, I lived with this double impulse, the urge to disappear and the desperate desire to be acceptable. See, now she just explicitly explained this to us, and that's really, really helpful, because then you didn't have to infer it, although you can see that I was already beginning to infer it, anticipating what she explained explicitly. I soon learned that there were certain areas I was automatically allowed to perform in: scholarship, athletics, and school-time activities like the yearbook, the newspaper, and student government. I tried all these and made good grades, became news editor, held an office in the Girls' Athletic League. I also learned that outside school another set of rules prevailed. That means they won over. Choosing friends, for instance, often depended on whether or not I could be invited into their homes, whether their parents would allow this. And what was so infuriating, looking back, is how I accepted the situation. If refused by someone's parents, I would never say, "Go to hell," or "I'll find other friends," or "Who wants to come to your house anyway?" I would see it as my fault, the result of my failings. I was imposing a burden on them. I would absorb such rejections and keep looking, because for some reason the Scholarship Society and the Athletic League and the yearbook staff didn't satisfy me, were never quite enough. They were too limited, too easy, or too obvious. I wanted to declare myself in some kind of different way. And old enough to be marked by the internment, but still too young for the full impact of it to cow me, I wanted in. To cow is to like disturb or tyrannize her. At one point, I thought I would like to join the Girl Scouts. A friend of mine belonged. That blonde girl who commented on my reading, her name was Radine. Her parents had come from Amarillo, Texas, and had made a little money in the aircraft plants, but not enough to get out of Cabrillo Hills. We found ourselves walking partway home together every day. Her fascination with my ability to speak English had led to many other topics, but she never mentioned the Girl Scouts to me. One day I did. "Can I belong?" I asked, then adding as an afterthought, as if to ease what I knew her answer would have to be, "I am Japanese." "Gee," she said, her friendly face suddenly masked. "I don't know, but I'm sure we could find out. Mama is the assistant troop leader." And then the next day, "Jeannie, no, I'm really sorry." Rage may have been simmering deep within me, but my conscious reaction was, "Oh, well, that's okay, Radine. I understand. I guess I'll see you tomorrow?" "Sure, I'll meet you tonight. I'll meet you at the stoplight." I didn't hold this against her any more than I associated her personally with the first remark she made. It was her mother who had drawn the line, and I was used to that. If anything, Radine and I were closer now. She felt obliged to protect me. She would catch someone staring at me as we walked home from school, and she'd growl, "What are you looking at?" She's an American citizen. She's got as much right as anybody to walk around on the streets. Her outbursts always amazed me. I would much rather have ignored those looks than challenged them. At the same time, I wondered why my citizenship had to be so loudly affirmed, and I couldn't imagine why affirming it would make any difference. If so, why it kept me out of Manzanar. But I was grateful when Radine stuck up for me. Soon we were together all the time. I was teaching her how to twirl baton, and this started a partnership that lasted for the next 3 years. I hadn't forgot what I learned in camp. My chubby teacher had taught me well. Radine and I would practice in grassy plots between the buildings, much as I used in the fire breaks near Block 28, behind the back, between the legs, over the shoulder, high into the air, above the 2-story rooftops, watching it, timing its fall for the sudden catch. We practiced the splits and bending backward and the high-step strut. And I saw myself, a sequined princess, leading orchestras across a football field, the idol of cheering fans. There happened to be a Boy Scout drum and bugle corps located in the housing project next to ours. They performed in local parades, and they were looking for some baton twirlers to march in front of the band. That fall, Radine and I tried out, and we suited them just fine. They made me the lead majorette in the center between Radine and Gloria, another girl from the 7th grade. Those two wore blue satin outfits to accent their bright blonde hair. My outfit was white, with gold braid across the chest. We all wore white calf-high boots and boat-shaped hats. We worked out trio routines and practiced every weekend with the boys marching up and down the streets of the projects. We performed with them at our junior high assemblies, as well as in the big band reviews each spring. With our batons glinting out in front of the bass drums and snares and shiny bugles, their banners, merit badges, khaki uniforms, and their squared-off military footwork. This is exactly what I wanted. It also gave me the first sure sign of how certain intangible barriers might be crossed. Intangible are those that you can't see, but they're there. The Girl Scouts was much like a sorority, of the kind that I would be excluded from in high school and later on in college, and it was run by mothers. The Boy Scouts was like a fraternity and run by fathers. Radine and I were both maturing early. The boys in the band loved having us out there in front of them all the time, bending back, stepping high in our snug satin outfits and short skirts. Their dads, mostly Navy men, loved it too. At that age, I was too young to consciously use my sexuality or to understand how an Oriental female can fascinate Caucasian men. And, of course, far too young to see that. Even this is usually just another form of invisibility. It simply happened that the attention I first gained as a majorette went hand in hand with a warm reception from the Boy Scouts and their fathers. And from that point on, I knew intuitively that one resource I had to overcome the war-distorted limitations of my race would be my femininity. When Woody came back from Japan and when Ray came home on leave from the Coast Guard, they would tease me about the short skirts we wore and about my legs, which were near the other extreme from the heavy-thighed daikon ashi of the ballet dancer at Manzanar. They call me gobo ashi, after the long, brown, twig-like root vegetable gobo. They laughed, but they would show up for parades whenever they were in town, proud of their neighborhood celebrity. It was a pride Papa didn't share. When I was striving to become Miss America of 1947, he was wishing I'd be Miss Hiroshima of 1904. He would counsel me on the female graces as he understood them, on the need to conceal certain parts of the body, on the gaudiness of smiling too much, but his tastes could not compete with the pull from the world outside our family. For one thing, not much of our family remained. Though larger than the rooms at Manzanar, this apartment was still cramped, forcing us kids outside. Weed and shifts. Mama was gone most of the time. And worst of all, I had lost respect for Papa. I never dared show this, but it was true. His scheme for setting up a housing cooperative had failed. With blueprints in hand, he tramped through the Japanese community to hostels, trailer courts, other housing projects like ours, trying to find families who would invest in it. Few had money. Those who did were terrified to let any of it go. And the very idea of banking on some kind of matching support from the government seemed laughable after their internment experience. Papa needed an enterprise he could manage from within the family. He decided that a fortune could be made catching shrimp and abalone off the coast of Mexico, and then bringing it back to dry and sell in Southern California. Woody was out of the Army by this time and looking for work, and as a citizen he could get a commercial license. So at intervals he would rent a boat, take it down to Ensenada or below, load up with abalone, bring the catch home, and all the rest of us would spend the days cleaning and cutting up the meat and stringing it out to dry in the bedrooms. For months the apartment reeked of drying seafood. So I am putting together that Woody is one of her brothers. It was almost a brilliant scheme. In 1947, no one was yet drying abalone commercially, but there was a small worm that kept attacking the drying meat. Papa could never figure out how to control it. The plan went to pieces. His failures were sharpened in an odd way by Woody's return. He came back from Japan with his mustache thicker and bearing a sword that had been in the family for 300 years, a gift from Aunt Toyo. He brought other trophies, painted scrolls, lacquered trays, things he would have valued only slightly before the war. All this delighted Papa, filled him with pride for his son who had returned a larger man, with a surer sense of himself and where we all had come from. And yet while Woody grew, Papa seemed to shrink, losing potency. The roles had been reversed. Before the war, he'd been the skipper. Now he depended more and more on Woody, who had the youth and a citizen's mobility, who could license the boat or cross borders easily. Even more vulnerable, Papa began drinking heavily again, and I would watch it with sorrow and disgust, unable then to imagine what he was going through. Too far into my own junior high school survival. I couldn't understand why he was home all day and when Mama had to go out to work. I was ashamed of him for that, and, in a deeper way, for being what had led to our imprisonment. That is, for being so unalterably Japanese. I wouldn't bring my friends home for fear of what he would say or do. When he refused to show up for the parades, I marched in. This separated me from him that much more. Well, the events he did show up for left me miserable and embarrassed. One night, the local PTA held an awards dinner for all of the students in Scholarship Society. I was among them, and this was the sort of achievement Papa encouraged. He and Mama dressed up for dinner. They overdressed. It was the first time they had mixed socially with Caucasians since leaving camp. Papa seldom spoke to Caucasians during those years or at any time afterward. When he did, it was a point of honor to appear supremely dignified. He still thought of himself as an aristocrat. He bought himself a brand new single-breasted suit of brown worsted for this occasion, and with the matching brown vest and a brown and yellow flowered silk tie. Worsted is it's a kind of fabric, by the way. Mama wore a maroon crepe dress with long sleeves and a necklace of shimmering gold discs and a black Persian lamb coat that I had not seen since before the war. She wore her hair in an upsweep. I knew she felt elegant and glad to be there. She smiled continually, smiled at everyone as if to make up for Papa's solemn courtesies. When it came time for each student to be presented a certificate, the parents were introduced. Most of them stood up hastily or waved from their chairs like Radiant's dad, a big, ruddy Texan, just as unfamiliar with this scene as Papa was. He blushed and grinned foolishly, and everyone grinned back, loving him. I was standing at the head of the table, shaking the principal's hand when Papa rose, his face ceremoniously grave, and acknowledged the other parents with his most respectful gesture. He pressed his palms together at his chest and gave them a slow, deep Japanese bow from the waist. They received this with a moment of careful, indecisive silence. He was unforgivably a foreigner then. Foreign to them, foreign to me, foreign to everyone but Mama, who sat next to him, smiling with pleasant modesty. 12 years old at the time, I wanted to scream. I wanted to slide out of sight under the table and dissolve. So it ends there. And you have to kind of wonder why. I certainly do. It just seems to be like, okay, what happened? So what does that have to do with a double impulse? And I have to admit, it takes me a second to think about it, but she's basically saying that her Papa stands up and he is noticed at her ceremony where she's supposed to be recognized and get her awards. They come in looking pretty elegant and nice, and her dad does something Japanese, and suddenly she doesn't want to be noticed again because she doesn't want to be marked once again as a Japanese person, which puts her as a weirdo for everyone else. So you can consider this experience of a person who's not white in a predominantly white world and ask, why does that person have to feel like that they don't belong because of the way they look? Why do they have to feel like they have to talk the same, or that people should be surprised that they do talk the same? These are strange questions. I hope you enjoyed the reading.